When was the last time you could think of where there were genuinely 4 contenders in each conference in the NBA? And I don't mean like borderline contenders. I mean genuine contenders. Teams that if I told you they won the championship in 2023, you would believe me. Like, it just wouldn't be a big surprise. It wouldn't register as like, how did that happen? That level of parity hasn't been felt in the NBA in a long time, if at all. That is, of course, until recently. Because now the NBA is just absolutely loaded with contenders, as stacked as it really could possibly be. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about how I believe personally parity is at an all-time high. Real quick, if you end up enjoying this video, subscribe. Only makes sense if you enjoy this content, you subscribe for more. Also drop a like, helps the video do better, and I really appreciate it. Now, as I said in the intro, when I say contenders, specifically referring to there being 4 in each conference, I am referencing contenders. What I mean by that is, for me personally, I really have 2 tiers of contenders. There is the A tier, which are teams that could genuinely be viewed as favorites through the right lens, or B tier, which are teams that are on the cusp of maybe being in that A tier, but for some reason or another, there's a handful of teams you would pick over them, even if they do have a roster that you could see, in a way, maybe winning a championship. Like, let's put it as a B tier contender, you wouldn't be surprised if they made the conference finals, but you might be surprised if they made the finals. So with that said, how many teams would I consider in that A tier? Well, in the Western Conference, obviously the team that just won the championship is one of them, so there is the Golden State Warriors. As much as y'all want to clown on them, and in fairness, pretty much rightfully so, the Phoenix Suns are still contenders. A completely healthy Nuggets team that builds its chemistry properly, absolutely a contender in my opinion. And again, a healthy Clippers team is for sure a contender, as this is the best roster the Clippers have had maybe ever. Then out east, of course, the runner-up Boston Celtics have to make this list, as do the Milwaukee Bucks. And as much as everyone hates them, the Nets are true contenders if everyone's healthy and they do not drama their way into a loss. The Heat have been in the finals or been 1 game away for 2 of the last 3 years, so I think it's fair to label them as true contenders finally, when they were generally a team that teetered the line for me. And the Sixers are probably contenders, though they do border on B tier for me, really just depending on what James Harden ends up being next year, as well as Tyrese Maxey's development. Overall though, I would still categorize them as an A tier level contender. So that is in total 9 true A-tier, top-tier contenders in the NBA. Nearly 1 out of every 3 teams in the league has genuine championship prospects. Now, for those B-tier contenders, in the East, I honestly only consider the Cavs to be a B-tier contender. Don't think the Hawks quite have it. The Bulls definitely don't, especially with Lonzo likely out for a large chunk of the year. And I think the Raptors are probably still like 2 years away. Out west, the Mavericks, Grizzlies, and Timberwolves are all B-tier contenders in my eyes personally. And if the Lakers made that Russ for Turner and Hield trade that's been rumored forever, if they actually made that happen, I would consider them contenders as well. So, if we are being a little bit generous with our idea of what a contender is, that gives us an astonishing 13 potential championship outcome teams, which is well over a third of the league and nearly half of it. And being that there are just 8 slots for the playoffs, and 13 of those 16 slots are being taken up by A or B tier contenders, that means that there's only going to be 3 teams that make the playoffs this year that would be teams that have really no shot at a title. Obviously, that's how things look going in. Things can change, teams can be disappointing, teams can be surprising. I'm just saying the way it looks based on precedent, that it seems as though only 3 teams would be making the playoffs this year. that aren't going to be really likely to have a shot. Not really likely, but at least somewhat likely. Like usually there's like a handful of teams that it's just like, yeah, they're in the playoffs, but so what? This year, it'd be a very small amount. Right now, you almost have to be a contender to be a playoff team. And even when you look around the league at the teams below those guys, these teams are usually either on the come up or going in the right direction in some way or another. Another take that is in this video, I guess, I'm giving it to you now, is that there's not a lot of stupid franchises anymore. Like when I first got into the NBA, there were a lot of franchises that were actively making terrible decisions at every turn. Now when I think about it, there are a few instances of franchises being incompetent, but like consistently over the top incompetent all of the time. It's not really happening. I think most teams, most fan bases should be happy with the direction their team is going, whether they are rebuilding, contending, or somewhere in between. I think just about every team is on the right pace, which is pretty fucking hard to do. It's hard for out of a group of 30 for there not to be a couple of dimwits. And sure, there are teams you're probably thinking of like the Knicks, for example, who are still not doing great, but generally I like the direction of almost every NBA team. You know, it's not entirely universal, but it's much more there than it used to be for sure. There aren't a lot of outright stinker, just bad teams like the Thunder, Rockets, Jazz, Spurs, Pacers, and maybe Magic are the only teams I expect to be genuinely bad next year. And even then, I could see the Thunder or the Pacers and the Magic not being awful. And I could see teams like the Kings, Pistons, Wizards, or Knicks having an upswing and competing for the playoffs. How many times in league history can you say that only really 4 teams aren't good enough to compete for an 8th seed? Honestly, the one negative that could be viewed coming out of just all of this excellent basketball pretty much universally around the league is for the teams that are middling, for teams that are, you know, not in the bad but improving and not in the contender territory, starts to make you really wonder what the point is. And that's really me reflecting as a Bulls fan. As this offseason transpired, I started to feel worse and worse about the Bulls' position in the league because I personally just don't think they're a contender even when healthy. And I also don't know that there's really an avenue for them to improve that dramatically, especially being that going forward, they're banking so much on increasingly aging players in DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic. Nikola just had like the worst season of his starting career last year, and it's not looking like it's going to get any better, although, hey, you could argue it couldn't get worse. DeMar DeRozan, how many years in a row can we expect him to be that guy? You know, you start to ask these questions more of these middling teams, which has kind of always been the case, but it feels even more extreme now because there are very few teams that aren't either up and coming or there right now. It's really, the middle is getting more pushed. The NBA's middle class is disappearing, I guess. I will just admit, as a Bulls fan, this level of parity, talent, and competence that has been shown league-wide has me a little nervous. Realistically, either we end up getting smacked by a contender or left in the dust by an up-and-coming team like the Hawks or the Raptors or something. Now, obviously, all these things can't come to fruition. Not every team can make the playoffs, not every team can win a championship, but the actual potential that exists within so many teams in the NBA. There is obviously going to be one team or another that drops the ball. There's probably some team that I haven't given their due credit that's going to exceed expectations. Maybe the Raptors aren't 2 years away. Maybe the Hawks do put it together with DeJounte Murray there. Either way, the potential for this level of parity, I don't know that it's been seen before. And it's hilarious to think about, being that we're just a few years removed from basketball being entirely lacking in parity when the Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant existed. But now that that team finally got broken up, it's almost like we had to deal with 2 years, kind of 3-ish, with just no fucking parity at all, in order to come out on the other end and have more parity than ever. It's really beautiful, both as a basketball fan and as a content creator. I cannot tell you who I think is going to win the 2023 championship, because I do not have an answer. I've thought about making a video about the subject. I thought about making this video kind of that subject and like talking about that at the end, but I genuinely don't know. I don't have a strong pick for who I believe is going to win the championship. That's perfect. The harder it is to make that pick, the better the league is, in my opinion. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.